Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
All right, welcome back everyone to Pasture Prime Time with Neil. I'm your host Neil, in case you've forgotten. Today we're exploring the roots and future of regenerative living, agriculture, including permaculture and nature, one story, one conversation at a time. With me today is Mattias Seeger, a really special friend and guest who's joining me all the way from Sweden. And we're going to dive into the human side of regeneration. We're also going to blend in psychology, anthropology, deep connection with nature, and really explore the complexities and challenges that we have as we synthesize all these different elements and think about the work that we're doing, specifically blending technology with our living systems. And I am really excited to explore our conversation today, Mattias, and share with our audience some of the thoughts that we have and some of the perspectives. You sitting in Sweden and having that European perspective, and myself over in Canada here, some of the synergies, some of the differences, some of the gaps. So maybe, Mattias, I would start with asking you, where did your love of permaculture come from, and why is that core of some of the things that drive you today?
Yeah, thank you. Very nice to be here, Neil. I'm appreciating it a lot. And as I mentioned before, I've seen your work around and think you're doing a very, very amazing job in the permaculture perspective, but the regenerative specifically all around that. I'm mixing the regenerative farming and agriculture with also technology as blockchain, etc. I think you're doing a very, very important work concerning like how can we transform and move the world and expectation on how we can live a more sustainable and regenerative life. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for having me here, Neil.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's important work, and certainly the balance of finding sustainability is, I think, the hard aspect of that. But I diverge. Let's come back and sort of pick up where we both connected. Really, it's this world of permaculture that leads into regenerative and all the other great things that we're doing collectively.
Yeah. So my connection to regenerative and permaculture, I guess it's different things. Being a Swede in general, we still maybe to Gen Z at least, most of us have a strong connection with nature. So during COVID, for instance, people of course start to enjoy their home in Sweden more than traveling and for tourists, for instance. But most people, because we have the lakes, we have the archipelagos, we have the forests, so trekking, climbing, foresting, living the life is very, very strong. And the farming community is pretty big and strong still in Sweden. And the farming is then, of course, agriculture as one part and the forestry as another part. So everybody has those connections, and everybody has a cottage house or their grandparents' cottage house or a farmstead somewhere in some remote place. So that connection is very strong. And I grew up with two grand families where nature was very close, and they brought me to the nature. We were out on the seas and the lakes, sailing, fishing, trekking, and sleeping during the summers. And like now, when it's midsummer and the sun never goes down, we sleep under bare skies. So that's super strong with us. But as you study and you do your career, you tend to be urbanized. Mm-hmm. And I'm at my background as a consultant. You go into that hectic, like central city lifestyle, and you lose that connection. And what happened with me, like 2001, when we had this .com crash, and I was engaged in multiple organizations that crashed, I actually get into my introvert and like reflected on my health, on my lifestyle, and I really, really missed that part, the connection to nature there. So we actually left the urban life for a while and get this experience with a little bit more remote place, with nature, and started to breathe again, more or less. So that there's happened something with that connection, and that was very, very strong. The permaculture itself was an effect of working with leadership development, doing transformations with big organizations like EA Games from a global perspective, but also European and Scandinavian organization. That was huge transformations, actually. And looking into those, we speak about complex adaptive systems and how everything is connected. But in all those environments, it's extremely capital driven, or it's very much general system approaches, like we are machines and everything are machines. And the impact on our own health or the world around us, what is that about? And connected that to the systemic approach, then I realized, like, how are things really connected? So going back again to nature and nature mimicry and how is systems working, and how are we as a part of that, and how can we actually build organizations mimicking nature from those aspects. Beautiful. So we started to play around and work with them, and this was like 2014 somewhere.
That's beautiful. And you know, I find a lot of people miss that self-awareness, where, you know, how nature impacts us and how we can have that synergistic alignment with technology, with our businesses and the urban centers. For those of you that gotten to know me, I'm still an owner and operator of a farm out in Canada, and I do a lot of travel. So I end up in urban centers quite often, speaking engagements, and I'm actually tomorrow heading out to another urban center for a cover crop conference.
Yeah.
But the piece that never passes by me or hits me flat in the face is how much we can actually bring nature into urban centers, right? And so it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a combination. And I think that's, you know, some of the uniqueness of permaculture is it can be scaled down or scaled up. And I would say the same as regeneration. I don't know if you find that at all in some of your consulting work. And by the way, EA Games is a great Canadian, Vancouver-based gaming. I played a lot of their games, so yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I love the Canadian touch. Yeah.
And yes, definitely. So as you say, like inviting the regenerative into the cityscape. So we see those movements also here in Sweden. I was working with an amazing guy called John Higson. We did advertisement work together in the 90s, and we started actually. What are they called? Bondesegen was the Swedish word, so farmers market. So there were no farmers markets in Sweden back in the 90s. And he has been in the US and moved around, and we had this what is called Agenda 25 back then, which was like, okay, by 2025, we should have a huge amount of production and food and be self-sufficient, where it's like 250 kilometers produced. Everything should be produced less than 200. And he came back from England and USA, he's an Englishman, and said, Mattias, we must start this farmers market. I had no clue what he spoke about. So, but I'm doing business development and marketing and into digitals, I could support with some stuff. And we worked around with that. And today there is 17 farmers market with that agenda, like farmers produce whatever. So 1997, we had the first experience with 125 farmers in midst of Stockholm. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So that was also part of like seeing from your produce from your own stead and farm and having a relationship with end consumer. And I started thinking like your blockchain engagement, etc. But that was to go there and see all those quality stuff and listening to the farmers. So some were like doing harvesting apples, for instance, and speaking with them and the diversity and the importance of keeping those different species and sorts and how you grow them. And they were doing that in the regenerative part and eating that food and going to the dairies, whatever. And that was an amazing experience when I was like 27 years old. So that was also a very important move. How are you working with the city and urban regenerative today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm a big fan of farmers markets, and I continue to say just on that thread really quickly, it's not production agriculture versus farmers markets. It's not one or the other. It's a combination. We need this diversity in how we access food as much as we have diversity in growing our ecosystems, and certainly grow with one of our dApps, which is a decentralized application on our blockchain, which I'd love to explore with you at some point, is all about that. It's direct farm to consumer or business to business, using decentralized finance and the blockchain to keep everything transparent. But it's the Nourish market is what we built, and it really is about nourishing people's minds, bodies, souls, environments, and everything in between. And I think the reason I mentioned that is I tend to use that as a premise as the integration from our rural communities into our urban communities, that getting to know the people that are growing or raising your food is one aspect. The other aspect is, what can we learn from our rural communities, and how do we tweak it and modify it in our urban centers? And then in the same aspect, can we have a better connection in terms of consumer-led access to food or to things that nourish us? And it doesn't necessarily always have to be food. And your leadership consulting can be a service that works both rural and urban centers. And so I talk about it from nourishing the body in terms of the mind first. It starts with fueling our body with the right foods and doing really amazing things. And I talk about food from an aspect of nutrition. And so I'm not about chasing yield or quantity or volume. I also really love finding, and this is maybe a bit selfish, but I really love finding and sharing the story with others, fruits and vegetables that look deformed, that really are like not your typical what you see and what you're marketed. And that's what I purchase. And I say, there's probably more nutrition in this than the one that's being picked for the perfect image and, waxed up, and because we forget about it, right? It's the forgotten fruits and vegetables. But it's the storytelling, and it comes back. And I think you and I, just briefly, as we were getting onto this conversation here, talked about Indigenous connections. In Canada, there's a lot of First Nations. I've worked with a lot of First Nations and also in America. And one of the things that I continue to take away is this knowledge sharing, and it's just storytelling, right? And it's the same thing I do in the urban centers, and I talk about how you access food and the questions you should ask in the grocery. And I'm not saying that groceries are bad. We just have to ask different questions so that they start changing and those paradigm shifts start happening. Same with going into restaurants. Question what's on the menu and where does the food come from, and whether it's a 100-mile diet or a 250-kilometer diet, or supporting local is great, but how do we continue to do that as we expand, so we create that domino effect, so that we can feed the world more effectively? For a lot of people, I also talk about how do you grow food in your own homes, and taking the idea that if you think about trying to feed the world by a certain time frame with a certain population size, it's scary. We can't even fathom it. Well, just think about feeding your neighbor more nutritiously, and if we all do that, we can all be part of the system, right? And so if you grow potatoes and your neighbor is growing, herbs, and the other neighbor is growing tomatoes or tomatoes, depending on where you're from, we start to create a little bit of a community hub, and then that can go into supporting our nutrition, which helps fuel the brain and helps us be better connected with our environments. But there's a lot of little things and there's a lot of big things. We just have to start listening to what's being told to us in terms of that knowledge sharing. And, I think the work that you're doing, and even some of that work around integration of technologies is very, very important. And that's maybe where I come in at that intersection of technologies.
How come you, with a farmer's background, went into technology? How is that bridging, or what opened up your eyes, or the bridge path?
So it's twofold, and that's a great question. one, people are making money off of farmers' data. And so everything in agriculture comes down to one aspect, and it really is the commodity. Everything else is just what we're doing. And the commodity is data.
Yeah.
And it's the equipment dealers, it's the seed providers, it's the input companies, the nature-based ones as well. It's the infrastructure, it's the animal, livestock, genetics, and veterinary. Um, everything. Everything's data driven, data connected, data results, data KPIs. Data, you probably see that in business as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was sick and tired of people making money off of farmers' data without the farmer benefiting. So what can we do to change that? Well, the only mechanism I found, and I'm not saying this is the best thing since sliced bread, but it's the only mechanism I found to really create a neutral playing field, and that's the blockchain, where data can be in a position that's tamper proof, that no one is trying to create a narrative, falsifying or cooking the books for anyone's agenda, that we now create an equal playing field, which means you have good data, but you also are going to see the bad data. So when the things aren't looking so good,
And you get the transparent data through the whole chain. What we did, for instance, we set up farmers market, and this was amazing. So we invented here in Sweden, actually, and that this was 2002. We invented micropayments.
yeah,
So we set up, so we set up this web page where people, and we started in Stockholm. So people in Stockholm were able to buy groceries and food from different farms around this region. A lot of different things. So we had 125 different producers. But to go in as a consumer and buy from one and have it delivered, and also as it's fresh, like fruit or whatever, it didn't work out in that way. So we said, let's introduce micropayments. So a consumer goes in, we create those hubs where the farmers deliver stuff to, finished packaged, and then we have those people just going around and picking it up and deliver it to the consumer. And what we did then, we have this Postgiro, is it called in Sweden, a banking association with the different banks coming together. So we spoke with them and said, well, we want to make this kind of site. People should be able to buy from different places, and then they get this order that the farmers pick up and they package this. And then the consumer should only have one invoice. And as they pay that invoice, all the money should be spread accordingly to different. And they said, we have never heard about this before. So they set up a small unit within that bank, and we find ways to how can we interact with their systems and APIs in order to make this happen. So we built that up. It took a year more or less to get that going, and we didn't have blockchain then, but this was actually producer, consumer, and we were super clear. Like there was like a 10% commission going to the supporting organization, which was an NGO as well. So having that transparency with, and I assume that is also what you do. You can see, because if you look into chocolate or coffee production, chocolate, like 1,000 part of the production or the consumer price is actually going to the producer. So you can see those probably. How is that impacting them? What is the impact on people and organizations when you do?
Wonderful, yeah. I really like that micropayments. That was ahead of our. We're doing the same thing now, and I find this happens right in life, that people start with these great ideas, falls away, it comes back in a slightly different way. So blockchain, smart contracts is what we use today. Sets up, and then the ledger, and that's how everyone stays accountable. It's that ledger on the blockchain. The impact is tremendous. We're working globally with farmers. We're putting more dollars back in their pockets. We're creating new market spaces for them that they never had access to. We're connecting with more consumers and really the whole value chain. But the thing that I really find beneficial is that we're helping flip the script on the food supply chain. And so the food supply chain knows it's broken. It has problems, inherent, issues. We're helping change conversations, and that's what I get fueled by every day. And the impact I can see that clear as mud, or clear as day, I should say. Probably mud's the wrong term. With the farmers, when they're saying to me that, hey, we're talking with our supply chain about how they can access our product, our data. We can create QR codes. We can have better connection with their consumers, and we're validating that our product is more nutritious, and
Yeah.
and so we're being rewarded for making sure that our environments, whether we're growing or raising food, is more nutritious, and we're getting that to the farm, to the consumer. um, it's a wonderful thing, and it's the conversations like we're having, the real conversations about what's really happening at the farm level, all the way down to the food on your plate. um, and I think it's tremendous, and I think the consumers on an impact side, I know, my family, my friends, their extended friends and family, as I continue to hear from them, and everyone I meet, anyone that goes to the Nourish Mart and says, "Oh wow, I can access really nutritious food and products and services that have a regenerative model to them. I didn't know this was available, and I can connect directly to the farmer if I want, or the
Yeah.
intermediary that's housing a group of co-ops, to gather people together." I was just speaking to a farmer in the Dominican Republic, so we do a lot of work in um, less advantageous farming sectors around the world. And he was just blown away. He said, he's a coffee producer actually, and he
Yeah.
said, "You're giving me an opportunity to find a market space I never thought was going to be available to me, and an equal playing field with coffee producers in other regions." Uh, and all I did was come in and offer him an opportunity to look at blockchain, change the conversations, support him with part of his regenerative transition. And it's the same thing I do to everyone. So he's no different than any other farmer I work with, but his life changed it that much more impactfully than somebody in America, maybe in Europe. Just because we're going from 0 to 60 quite quickly, where in North America, Europe, we're going from 0 to 30 maybe, and then it's smaller incremental steps.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, that's fantastic, and it also, as you mentioned, going back to relationships, uh, you start to have a relationship with between the consumer, or yeah, the consumer and the producer. So you get another level of meaning into that. And also going back to my permaculture experience, it was like I was on in the store, I looked into like buying a barbecue chicken, and was in a period when I was mainly vegan as well.
Mm.
And I had some troubles with that concerning proteins. So it was hard for me to because like beans and stuff in Sweden, it's lost. There used to be a lot of beans, natural beans, going back to farms in the like 19th, 18th century. Beans was like a base staple food here. But
Right.
today, beans is not that. It's not that commercial. So
Mm.
farmers in general don't do that. So when you do that, that's home farming. So that's from my going back to my grandmother, for instance. So
Mm-hmm.
they had beans in their garden. So we had that. But otherwise, I think it's been hard for proteins, and I realized, okay, we can probably balance these things and having chickens, etc. But I stood there holding this barbecued chicken. It was like $6, €6, and I was asking the question to myself, how can this piece cost €6?
Right.
And as I had start growing my own chicken and having and realize the price, energy, everything for getting this going. I was trying as a permaculture. I was like, well, my wife said, like, Mattias, we must give them food, and we should. No, we don't go that way. Uh,
Mm.
we must make sure in a permaculture environment that we are growing things that's good for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to find like ecological seeds that should fit their food. And when I went to the vendors or the producer, they were really shocked. Like, why are you buying that? Because it were professional farmers, etc. They used to be too. And here comes the consumer saying, well, we're having 1 acre of land, and we are building this permaculture. They couldn't understand what I was speaking about, more or less.
Right. Yeah.
And there was flowering. The whole garden was like a flowering garden, and we had a lot of like fruit trees and bushes.
Yeah.
And realizing exactly coming back to what you do. When we then see the whole chain of production and also the suffer for the animal and the lifestyle, and we see this with the bird flus. You are having that in the southern North America now. We were hit pretty hard in Scandinavia 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And there's millions of birds that's just killed based on that, and suffering as well. So how can we live with that? So we actually had like 60 chickens, and having small children, it was also like they must know what this comes from and how it works. And if we want to eat meat, well, then we can grow it, and we need to prepare it ourselves. And two of them stopped to eat meat directly because they feel sorry about the animals. And I was like, okay, so if you go and buy a chicken for €6 in the store, how is that taken care of, handle and lifestyle? And I said, this is super bred for 12 weeks. And if it's 14 weeks, it will die based on like legs will break and they will have a heart attack because they are so badly managed. And I went through this from everything from seeds to fruit to everything with the kids. And the neighbors become pretty upset because we have this flowering garden. And they're like, you're not minding about your garden.
I know. It's a mind shift. I say to people all the time, Mattias, ecology is messy.
Yeah.
And we try to control it, but ecology is messy, and it's meant to be messy, and it's meant to, because of the diversity and the bugs, and yet we want it to look a certain way. That's why forests, I go to Germany, the forests are just, I think you were mentioning this too, just one monocrop, and the foliage, the structure of the tree doesn't start until you're about 5 feet in the air, and then you have the foliage because they prune it all the way up. It has to look a certain way, and that's not natural. That's not ecology working within itself. And so
and you see that when you walk in that forest, when you walk in such a, it's totally silent, and you don't hear or see anything. So the neighbors here, for instance, when I started to complain about the messiness of our garden, and I started to share my thoughts about what we were doing. So one family, a couple of houses away, are actually professors and working for the university in Uppsala with systemic biology. And they have been a little bit odd. And suddenly they had someone to speak about. So their voice got heard, and we started to share those with other people. And another elderly woman, like 80 years old, she was a biologist, but totally into like how should a Swedish natural garden, not natural, artificial garden look like. And when we started to speak about things and how we could do, and we had the bees, and they started to see, when one family came and said, we have never had such a yield on apples. And the flowering in our garden has increased immensely. So suddenly they start, as you say, the mind shift was there. And after that, every neighbor in the area is now having pretty big flower beds and natural grass without cutting it or having this artificial like 5 millimeter root system grass that's golf greens. They now have started to do that. And the next question that I started there like 5 years ago was also about how do we manage water? Because we have everybody was doing a lot of watering from the groundwater. I said that this is not sustainable. And we have this melon, huge lake. So let's make a system that we pump water from that, and we can use that for everything and work that out. So we last year we were done with building this watering system. So we don't use groundwater any longer. So everybody's taking the water from the lakes for everything. So that is going on with the community part as we start to speak about those things and mining about those things.
That's amazing. Well, job well done there. It only takes one person to start a paradigm shift.
Yes.
I'm curious. You've been working at that intersection as well, slightly different, but technology, AI. How does that come into your world? The natural environment and AI.
That's super interesting, because going back again to like the narrow systems and AI, and we are building. I'm working with some IT companies, and we have been working with AI as a tool for pretty long time. and I'm starting generative AI when ChatGPT came 22 in the autumn. I already have started work with that. And from my end, with leadership, if I set up programs or writing articles, it can be pretty many weeks of preparations there. And the first ChatGPT version that came there, just ChatGPT, not we can speak about agentic AI, but I just want to share that short story that in 1 week, production time went from 5 weeks to 3 days in producing a course. And people around me say, well, ChatGPT, it hallucinates and it's not accurate. Back then, that was before OpenAI actually was sued by Times. So you could actually ask ChatGPT for give me, for instance, in psychological safety, give them 10 most important articles, or in permaculture even, but psychological safety, most 10 important articles. I want to have quotes. I want to have very important information concerning psychological safety from 10 articles. And it actually took copies of the pages with references and the page number and article. You don't get that now. Now we get them back because everything is now licensed. But as you get that information, of course, Times then came, well, you're harvesting our licensing and then our material like that. But already there, I saw the huge value. And of course, I needed to go in and check, is this the right articles? But this is my domain. So I pretty quickly saw, this is right. So and then looking into when we do leadership development, so we are now using a lot of, we see what's happening with video and avatars and automatization and everything. I'm preferring to, as you actually say, and what we do in nature, and going back to the storytelling in the room, when is leadership and personal development strongest? That is actually when we meet and do that. And of course, we need to have examples, and of course, we need to have a knowledge transfer, as you say it. We don't need to have PowerPoints or sit for hours in studios or do that, and it should be more convenient how we get that. And with AI today, the whole of that part that used to be trainer-led, we can do that through AI, and then we can have the facilitation and conversation, as you see, moderating or facilitating conversation in moving thoughts and systems. We can focus on that as we meet as person instead, and don't think of this like training and education. So I think AI is supporting a lot with those more fundamental or basic knowledge management. But also if we go into, if we see, you mentioned the question about yields, for instance. So what I learned very early in the regenerative work is, well, when we have diversity, the total biomass is actually higher. So why do we go monoculture? It's because it's easier. We simplify the harvesting and management. And what my impression is, and seeing what will happen here now, because the energy, we can say it has a huge toll with battery and energy and production, and it takes a huge amount of energy to have AI. But we're also in the step into the quantum computing, and then we can also start to discuss. Right, so something. Are we just continuing, or how do you want?
Yeah, we're just continuing on here. For those of you who notice a little glitch here, just we're both in our rural homes, having a conversation across the globe. So just a few little technical glitches, but let's dive right back in, Mattias.
Thank you, Neil. Well, that's how life is: complexity, interruptions.
That's right.
So the learning with the regenerative was the yield is bigger when you go regenerative. Not the yield per species or article, but the biomass. And then was the understanding of, okay, what we do with digging and what we do with how we handle the soil, that's just to be efficient and to maximize the efficiency in output of people's work and labor work. And what I believe will happen with AI and with robotics is that we will turn from monoculture into regenerative in order to having automatized system that will read and understand the stages of maturity of fruit and berries and where they are, and sorting that out, and that kind of automatization will actually mind more about understanding, even taking tests of the soil and minding about the soil and seeing how is that doing and what we need to do about that. But also as we do the harvesting, the automatization process will be more diverse, and we get more biomass and higher quality based on both nutrition and taste and also a health perspective of the soil and the environment and people in the environment, definitely, without using a lot of pesticides or fungicides or whatever is used. Because in the early experience, I had this coal cabbage farming, and there came those caterpillars and those cabbage. What are they called? The flying things that eat cabbage. Yeah. So it's like, how can I manage that? So it was always a learning procedure, and everything I did was always a reluctance, or I was hit back from nature. And then I was like, okay, Mattias, if you add these brushes, or if you combine these different vegetables, or if you add flowers with scent, and if you do things a little more separated, then you don't get stuck in those monoculture experiences. The higher level of diversity, the higher level of balance in the system.
That's right.
But that's, from an efficiency perspective, is really, really hard, because you don't even know where are the specific plants that we should harvest, unless you have consumers go in there and just by chance going in there and picking. But with AI and robotics, that can be strongly automatized. So I see that we will have a revolution in that space where the combination of blockchain, energy, how we boost energy, and energy will be more clean and efficient. And as I mentioned, like quantum computing as well, as a part of like how much energy do you need today? Well, with AI today, it's a huge amount of energy. But think of like a computer chip, like 10 years ago, when you put the finger on that one, you burn your finger.
Mm-hmm.
The efficiency of computer chip today is not, it's so high compared to just 10 years ago. It's lot less energy consuming. So what we see ahead of us will be people working together with technology and robotics and AI, doing the management and harvesting and support. And as you mentioned, with the data, as we probably can have whatever drones or camera systems or robots, we will always also get the data of what is the status, what do we actually have, so we can communicate, or we can adapt the system in different ways and balance the system. And with AI, of course, and robotics, it will also do that on an automatic basis. What do we need to do? And get that support. So I see the technology will help us immensely going forward.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I also think, the just the power of trusting that the data isn't going to be used against the person that's originating the data, that it's, they have line of sight on how it gets used or monetized, or, whatever the case may be. Open sourcing is another term that seems a bit weird in agriculture. But I think
in what way?
needed.
How come is that weird?
Well, I think a lot of farmers, they don't want to share what they're doing, because if they can get a better yield or a better price compared to their neighbors, that's their secret and that's their advantage. Which I think it's the wrong way of thinking about it, because the more we share our data and look at the similarities and differences and gaps, we can improve all ecosystems. So that idea that one tide raises all ships.
Optimizing the whole, as it's classical says, once you step into perspective.
Yeah. But it feels scary, because as soon as you let go of your data to be analyzed, you feel like you've lost control, where I think the blockchain allows for that sovereignty to come in and maybe some of those fears to be diminished, so that we can have those meaningful discussions and those meaningful outputs of analysis.
Yeah. And it's also, as you said, it's also connected again with a mental paradigm, like, are we living in scarcity, and are we competing in a system where we also are exploiting or are exploited? We are exploiting the land and the creatures and animals, the soil, the seeds. We're exploiting actually the customers even, because we want to have the most possible out of them. and at the end, we're also in this value chain where others are exploding us. So that's a part of that mindset where we are exploiting each other and we live in competition. With like a systemic approach with transparency and focus on rather on the levels of command, and looking more into this networking approach where we look into what's the most value for the whole and going into that the big beautiful thriving world and system. Suddenly there's enough for everybody. We don't need to think about the competition in order to, it's the survival mode, rather we go into the thrive mode. Yeah,
it's supporting the commons, right, is sort of the terminology that's used. And fully agree with that. You mentioned talking about creating community and sort of supporting voices and communication. You've just recently started something called 300 Regenerative Voices, and I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, that is it's a really fun story actually, and interesting for my end, probably for yours as well. So what we do when we do leadership development, we like to build communities of learning and practice. So we go into an organization, we start to mirror the organization on a culture perspective and see this is how we actually work. And they always want to start with the managers and the executives. And I say, well, you have an echo chamber here. If you start doing that, you will hear the same things all the time. But if you want to really understand your culture, you need to involve people. And we want to be, as we use in ethnology or anthropology or in psychology even, we speak about reflexivity, the ability to listen into the system and fully embrace all the differences in the diversity of the system. So this is mirroring a lot of when we go into a garden and look into permaculture. What is happening here? How is things working here, and what is good and bad, and how are things? Not even doing anything about it. So that is what we do in leadership development when I work with culture parts. Based on that, we look into, okay, this is how you have it. And then people are also included in that description. So there's an ownership. It's not somebody in a management position pointing to people and saying, this is how it is. No, we see other things. Now suddenly we have just started to build a networking community just based on that. We have different groups. We're not pointing or blaming anything. And based on that, will next question be, okay, in order for this organization to thrive in its ecosystem, how can the culture be instead? And in general, everybody is trained into the traditional hierarchical system, Tayloristic approach with efficiency first, and we can see that a lot. But when we start to show examples from nature or other organizations, indigenous cultures, how is that working? Suddenly they see, can we copy or mimic or learn from them? Can we change how we do things? And then we go in and create this leadership model, because the leadership is creating the culture. So when I speak with some organizations, say, we want to have leadership development. And I say, why? Well, we need to have leadership development. And why? Well, we need to do things better. So in what way? So what is your culture? Or what culture do you want to have? And they get stunned. We have worked with leadership development. Nobody has ever asked us about what culture do you want to have, because the leadership approach that we apply and design is creating the culture. So what is rewarded and what are things that it's like, again, going back to permaculture. How do you want your garden, your environment, your growth to be and work like? And it's a paradigm mental, what is our approach? So then we designed the leadership. So that's like what I'm coming from. And there's areas, of course, going back to regenerative and the systemic and the nature parts, and the learning from that part, going into product development, organizational development, leadership development. There are some areas where I have special interest. And what I naturally do then is connecting people and supporting people. And as I share things on LinkedIn, it's hard to sort things out. So I thought, like, let's make a list of some people I follow And if other wants to follow them, whatever, I'm not the voice in general in regenerative. But if somebody's asking me or whatever comes over this list. So I made this list of 13 people. When I write about things that's concerning nature or regenerative, I will link to them.
Yeah.
So I made this list. I made one for products. I made one for AI. I haven't even started with my main focus, which is leadership and culture, because this was my experiments. I said, let's start this in order to sort things out. And the easiest way to do this for me in LinkedIn was make this post, have these 13 names, summarize for myself, who are they? And good, next time I want to share something, I can go back to that. Yeah. And I can mention them and I can find that. What happened was people started to share that list. They were, wow, that's amazing. Here's a list of great. Somebody was flattened. Somebody was happy to be involved. Other was, wow, this is my friend, or this is a name I haven't seen before. So people started to engage around those 30 names. And I also mentioned very clearly, this is my 30 names, because when I work with development, it's not dichotomies like it's always we or it's always I. So I was very clear about this is my 30 names. It might not be the right for everybody. And I'm also ethnocentric. This is being the Swede, 55-year-old guy, white guy in Scandinavia. This is my small group of people that I'm following. Right. But there's probably a huge world behind that. And I want to explore that as well. So the feedback and sharing started to be immense. And I said, like, okay, let's make this list 50 people. So I made the list to 50 people, but then I realized I could not have more than actually 15, 20 in the post. So I got some problems there already. So I said, well, I must do something else. And my friend Daniel Harris was on the list as well, and he went off site. And I said, okay, let's explore. Let's try to use web programming and build the site for this. So I very quickly used Lovable and specified what I wanted to do and built this site with 50 people. Because people started, and I wanted to be open. So I said, oh, come in here and we're welcome. And my network started to grow and I started to see new things. So suddenly the list was 50 people and I built this site. This was 72 hours later. And Daniel came back and he was like, Mattias, this is crazy. You started this list with 30 people. Now there is a site and you have those features and people are mentioning and sharing. Some were really upset. Some people who had strong names in the society were really upset because they said, this is a ranking system where you rank who are in this list and who we should follow. And then going back to my, from an anthropological perspective, so the number one is that this is not the rank. This is an in-group, yes, but it's not like number 1 or number 20. Yeah. Some people came from this place this is most Westerners. That's also perspective and colonization aspects. And I started to communicate like this. Yes, I'm starting where I am. This is a growing whatever, and I'm happily adding more people into this. Yeah. And I even said this, even if you go back to indigenous people and you have a chief or you have a shaman, that's a rank as well. Mm-hmm. And I prefer to have a group clarify this is 50 people. And I'm sorry if I have missed some very prominent, like you, Neil. I think you even were there. Then I lost you in the way, and then you're back, and you were super. There were 3 people nominating you when we added that feature again. Ah. So you are in the list of 300, definitely. And I think you were when we added from 50 to 100. Then I added the nomination feature. So I add a lot of features all the time. Yeah. And being very clear, it's my perception. And people came, well, you must give it away to community. Also, how this is, and of course, that is then regard saying this is important, it is great, because what I see in regenerative culture, the approach, there is a lot of people taking strong self-leadership, but we don't have the strong global movement. There's a lot of small communities and groups, and there is dialects or ethnographics, what do you actually evaluate, or variations of what do we mean with regenerative, etc. Yeah. And sometimes those are actually in itself competing.
Yeah.
So when people were uh, uh, going to me and also say, Mattias, you cannot rank people like this. I say, I can totally rank people with this, because these is my role models. Where I listen to Neil, or I listen to Daniel, or listen to other Daniel, because they are sharing so great things. I learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
And those also are the other parties. They are influencers on LinkedIn. They are sharing a lot of stuff. They are lifting other people. They are running courses. They are developing things. Absolutely, we can rank people from an in-group of this. And then I was thinking, like, okay, how can we build a more momentum about this? So I thought about the classical movie 300 and the Spartan 300.
Love it.
So like, okay, if we see this, like, if we see, and I'm not specifically into heroes, but I think, like, if you guys who are doing this work in regenerative, if we see you as heroes, 300 heroes that can have an impact on the regeneratives of the world, that's how I visualize the idea of 300.
Mm.
So who are then the 300 heroes coming together in this place where people who is not engaged in regenerative and are curious or are engaged in regenerative, and see how can we bridge and connect with different parts, and also with the map that they're now seeing, okay, who are actually in Scandinavia, who is in Holland, or who is in Australia, or who is in South Africa or South America.
Yeah.
How can I connect with people around me, or start to follow them, and get that image for 300 people who is putting all the soul into this and driving that important work of changing the world from my end. So that's the point of 300. And I even got asked, Mattias, why didn't set the vision of setting up 1,000 people to begin with? I said, this will never have happened, because suddenly it will be like too much.
Yeah.
And some feedback was strong, like saying, Mattias, what you're doing is actually super regenerative. You take some small idea, you seed it, and then it start to grow and move. And
Absolutely.
and some asking, how do you earn money on this? How do you capitalize? There's no idea about that. This is just doing this, supporting system, and the energy.
Yeah. Well, they have an impact, right? Like and very much appreciative of those who did nominate me, and thank you for inviting me into that 300. Um, but it was, you're giving it to the people, you're hearing them, you're observing, and then you're modifying or positioning the outcomes, based on what you're hearing. It's very much like permaculture, regenerative. We have an idea, we seed it, and then we have to have observational awareness of what's going on, because what we think is going to happen may not actually be what the outcome is at the end of the day. So yeah, I really love it. I really love it. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, good for you. And, I think it is important to create a community of I love the way you say it, 300, kind of like the Spartans, of regenerative Spartans, um, for them to communicate, and I find this myself, there's some days where it's like, well, who do I go to when I'm getting asked, questions, and where would I find that resource? And unless it's out of my own experience or catalog that I have, who are my experts and mentors and resource or like-mindedness individuals? And then for people at any stage of the journey, right? And I really try to strip down all the labels, organic, permaculture, these are all just systems that help us move towards a regenerative state, as you've mentioned. And I think that is very important to know that there are specialists out there that have, different expertise within this umbrella of regenerative, and whether you're needing, soil, or whether you're needing technology, or whether you're needing, um, documentary, componentry of this, or animal welfare. These all go together nicely. And I also think a piece that I work globally, but I often say I'm not an expert of all the different bioregions. And so what we do in South Africa or what we do in Europe, in Sweden, is very different than what we do in Canada. And I can't be an expert of everything. I can have some general knowledge, and I can have some special, understanding of different components. But we need those local specialists to align with, to work with, so that we have that local knowledge, that knowledge sharing that we talked about, that indigenous knowledge sharing, is because it's localized, hyper localized in some cases. Um, and that's very, very important, for us to be aware of, and to work together, in terms of understanding what I may bring as a general experience with a hyper localized knowledge, is 1 + 1 = 3, not just 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Isn't. Yeah. 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 Well, it's funny how, obviously the seed was planted many years ago when you saw some of the work that I did, and, to where we are today, and things come full circle. So, yeah, really, really appreciate this conversation here. We're getting close to the end of our time frame. Um, as I always do, I like to open up the floor and allow you to share anything that may be happening in your community. Something you would like the audience to know about. It could be anything at all, but I thought I'd just give you some opportunity to share something from your perspective, whether community or personal or something that the audience should be aware of. Mm, I love that. Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, mm, amazing. Mm, amazing, amazing. Well, those are terrific, and I definitely think our audience, our community, grow, and the larger community listening in. There's probably some good opportunities and good follow up here. So you can reach Mattias on LinkedIn. You can also contact myself, and I can put you in touch as a connector. And I look forward to many more conversations, Mattias, and certainly helping you potentially sooner than later on that nomadic journey of learning and growing. But in the interim, I hope your season here, as it sort of kicks off, and your own farm or own garden starts to flourish and be filled with abundance. So thank you for your time today. And until next time, everyone, we'll catch you on Pasture Prime Time. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.